Vijanapalaka Girivaradari Yasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunjabiyari Gopi Janapalapa Girivaradari Yasodanandana Vrajajanaranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Kishore Kishori ki jai, Jagannath Baladev Subhadra Marani ki jai, Boni Tamai ki jai, Chila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So this morning we're reading from Canto 10, Chapter 80, Text 3 through Text 7. So Text 3. Sabhagyaya tasya gunanhite karau chatat karau manascha smareta santam stirajan prameshu Srimati tatpunya punya kata sakama. Sabhagyaya tasya gunan grinite. Karau cha tat karma karau manascha. Smarit vasantam stira jangameshu. Srinoti tat punya kata sakkarma. Sabhagyaya tasya gunan grinite. Karau cha tat karma karau manascha. Smarit vasantam stira jangameshu. Srinoti tat punya kata sakkarma. And the word for the verse we just read is sa, that is vak, power of speech, yaya, by which, tasya, this, his, gunan, qualities, vinite, one describes, karau, pair of hands, cha, and, tat, his, karma, work, karau, doing, mana, mind, and smarit, remembers, Vasantam, dwelling, stira, within the unmoving, jangameshu, and moving, kinoti, ears, tat, is, punya, sanctifying, kata, topics, sa, that is, karna, and ear. And the translation from text 3 is as follows. This is by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Actual speech is that which describes the qualities of the Lord. Real hands are those that work for him. A true mind is that which always remembers him, dwelling within everything, moving and non-moving. And actual ears are those that listen to sanctifying topics about him. Interpreted by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. While continuing from the previous verse to glorify the sense of hearing dedicated to the Lord, King Parikshit mentions the other senses also, so that we gain a complete picture of Krishna consciousness. Here he declares that without any connection to Krishna, the Supreme Lord, all the organs of the body become useless. A similar statement is made by Shanakara Rishi in the second canto, third chapter, verse 20 to 24. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti mentions that the senses should work together in Krishna consciousness. In other words, whatever the eyes or the ears experience, the mind should simply remember Krishna, who is within all things. And text 4. Shirastu tasyo vaya lingam anamit tad eva yastasyati takti chakshu andani vishnorata taj yananam padodakam yani bhajanti nityam. Translation of text 4. An actual head is one that bows down to the Lord in his manifestations among the moving and non-moving creatures. Real eyes are those that see only the Lord, and actual limbs are those which regularly honor the water that has bathed the Lord's feet or those of his devotees. Text 5. Suto vacha Vishnu ratena samprishto Bhagavan Vadarayani Vasudeva Bhagavati Swami Magnad Daya Bravit, in the translation for text 5. Sutta Goswami said, thus questioned by King Vishnurata, the powerful sage Badarani replied, his heart fully absorbed in meditation on the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vasudeva. Text 6. Shri Shuko Vacha Krishnasya Sid Sakha Kashchit Brahmano Brahma Vitama Virakta Indriya Teshu Vasantapma Jitendriya. In translation from text 6, Sukadeva Goswami said, Lord Krishna had a certain Brahmana friend named Sudama who was most learned in Vedic knowledge and detached from all sense enjoyment. Furthermore, his mind was peaceful and his senses subdued. On we go, text 7. Yasri Chayo Papa Tanena Vatamano Vipashrami Tasya Varya Krupalisya Shuchama Chatata Vidha. Translation for text 7. Living as a householder, he, meaning was from the Brahmana, he maintained himself with whatever came of its own accord. The wife of that poorly dressed Brahmana suffered along with him and was emaciated from hunger in the corporal by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Sudama's chaste wife was also poorly dressed, and whatever food she obtained she gave to her husband. Thus she remained fatigued from hunger. Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurimitam Yeha Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manopistam Stapitam Yena Pitale Swarupa Gadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shuta Padikamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahakana Ragutam Vitam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijama Sahatam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishaka Vitam Shri Krishna Karina Sindhu Dina Bandoja Kapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namosati Tatsa Kanchana Gorangi Radha Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priya Panchakalpaturi Vyasha Kripa Sindhu Deva Chapatitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhumpada Swami Iti Namine Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Krishnaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pachayane Nirvishesha Sunyavadi Pashitya Deshitarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gauravata Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So, I'm just going to read text 3. It's such a long sequence of verses that hopefully through the discussion there'll be a kind of natural flow. So text 3 translation was, actual speech is that which describes the qualities of the Lord. Real hands are those that work for him. A true mind is that which always remembers him, dwelling within everything, moving and unmoving. And actual ears are those that listen to sanctifying topics about him. Now, there's Srila Prabhupada setting the scene for this entire sequence that we're looking at. And this is how Srila Prabhupada sets the scene when he's writing in Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. King Parikshit was hearing the pastimes of the Lord and of Lord Krishna and Lord Balaram from Sukadeva Goswami. These pastimes are all transcendently pleasurable to hear. And Maharaj Parikshit addressed Sukadeva Goswami as follows. So the as follows is continuing where we are today. And so this is what King Parikshit said, as he's addressing Sukadeva Goswami. the ability to talk, and this is Srila Prabhupada's writing, the ability to talk can be perfected only by describing the transcendental qualities of the Lord. The ability to work with one's hands can be only when one engages himself in the service of the Lord with those hands. Similarly, one's mind can be peaceful only when one thinks of Krishna in full Krishna consciousness. So that is Srila Prabhupada writing of what King Parikshit is conveying his thoughts to Sukadeva Swami as he's hearing the pastimes about Lord Krishna and Lord Balaram. So he's reflecting and he's giving these thoughts. Now, Maharaj Parikshit has referred to various sense organs. He's referred to the tongue, the hands, and the mind, all in relation to what effect it has just when they're used in relation to Lord Krishna. And Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his Sarata Darshani commentary, he draws on a statement of Prahlad Maharaj that echoes the same view that King Parikshit is giving. So you see the similarity. I'm going to read Prahlad Maharaj's statement. One who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvelous acts of the personality of Godhead and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord is to be considered to possess ear holes like the holes of snakes and a tongue like the tongue of a frog. So that was from the second canto and the third chapter, Prahlad Maharaj giving an assessment of the usage of the ears and the tongue in a way that when it's used in relation to Lord Krishna, talking about Lord Krishna's prowess or his marvelous acts, then actually it's a useful way to use those senses. But if one isn't, it's their senses are just like openings, like you might a creature might have, like a frog may have a tongue, or a snake may have holes. So it would be just like openings. They're not serving the proper function. Now, so you notice King Parikshit and Prahlad Maharaj, they're saying very similar things. About the proper usage of the senses. So the reason this is so is that the parts of the body, like the senses, so meaning, one's ears, which is being referred to, or one's tongue, and the limbs, are the transcendental dynamic force of the spirit soul. So they're not just material appendages. They're actually the dynamic force of the soul. It's allowing the soul to, forcefully reach out to do something. So, and that's Srila Prabhupada's words. I thought it was a fantastic description of the senses and the limbs of the body, the dynamic force of the spirit soul. So, you can make a distinction between senses and the action of the senses, which are impure or just materialistic. They're just parts of the body. When they're used just to actually get some gratification for the senses. So the tongue is used to enjoy speaking randomly. Or the ears are used to hear some, whatever it is, maybe gossip, it may be criticism, it may be some mundane sounds. Compared to senses that are purified and are being used in the service of the Lord in full. So that's a distinction you can make. There's the one set of senses that are just like material senses, and then there's the other set of senses where they've actually become purified because they're working in connection to the Supreme Lord. So they're functioning differently. And the dynamic force of the the soul, these senses, and means that the bodily actions become useful when the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme. This is how Srila Prabhupada is describing it. When these dynamic senses or these dynamic forces of the soul are useful, they're directly engaged with the Supreme, then it means that all the subordinate senses, like the mind and the intelligence, they also become automatically engaged in connection with the Supreme Lord. And the Katha Upanishad, and this is Srila Prabhupada drawing from it, he mentions that it states that the objects of sense gratification, so whatever you find on the outside that you can look at or hear or speak about or touch, it says that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses. So actually whatever's out there is actually superior to the senses you have. This is the Katha Upanishad. But the mind is superior to the sense objects. So this is a very interesting thought. On the subtle level, because the mind can take in everything and think about it, it's actually superior to what's on the outside, those objects of the senses. So that's what the Katha Upanishad says. If, therefore, the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, so it means that in that very subtle sense, the internal mind sense, if that mind is engaged constantly in the service of the Lord, then there's no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. That's the message in the Katha Upanishad, and Srila Prabhupada draws from that in one purport in the 3rd chapter, 42nd verse of Bhagavad Gita. Now, Srila Jiva Goswami, in reference to the verse that we read today, this 3rd verse in the 80th chapter, he explains that the usage of the mind is to directly serve the Lord. And one can think of the Lord as and the way you can do this, how you can be using the mind to serve the Lord, is that you can think of the Lord as being present in all those external things. So when you look at something, when you hear sound, you can think that the Lord is present in that. So that's how you're actually allowing the mind to be constantly thinking of the Lord. You remind, the intelligence reminds the mind, the Lord is present in the tiniest little atom in the air. So whatever you see, the Lord is present. So that's Srila Jiva Goswami. Now, the senses, particularly the mind, being engaged in Krishna's service, it can bring peacefulness. This is Maharaj Parikshit, what he has said. If the mind is engaged in Krishna's service, so we heard how Srila Jiva Goswami says you can help the mind to do that, it can bring about peacefulness. And this is how Maharaj Parikshit has explained it. The embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment through the taste for sense, but the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagement by experiencing a higher taste, he's fixed in consciousness. So, sorry, that wasn't Maharaj Parikshit, that's Srila Prabhupada explaining in Bhagavad Gita 259. So one experiences a higher taste. When one experiences a higher taste, one ceases sense gratificatory actions. One's actions change. One isn't reaching out for those external gratifying things for the senses, when internally the mind is engaged in thinking of Krishna, because one is seeing that Krishna is present in everything outside, and one comes to experience a higher taste. It just naturally happens. So then one doesn't direct one's actions externally in that blunt materialistic way. So, and Srila Prabhupada puts it this way: one automatically loses the taste for pale things. So it's considered pale in comparison. Now, Srila Prabhupada writes on the mind being engaged in Krishna's service, and this is how Srila Prabhupada puts it. This does not mean that one has to have very good, great thinking power. So, you don't have to be a great thinker to be able to do this. One has to simply understand that Krishna, the absolute truth, is all pervasive. So he's just like Jiva Jiva Goswami was saying. He's all pervasive by his localized aspect of Paramatma. It means Krishna is everywhere, present as Paramatma. So, very similar idea. It's not that, you've got to have this great thinking capacity to be able to come to a higher state of consciousness. Rather, it's just reminding oneself, reminding the mind that Krishna is present in everything external. So, if one looks at text 4, which states that the eyes which see both the deity, so I'm going to actually read not the translation we read here, but Srila Vishwanath rephrasing it. The eyes which see both the deity form of Vishnu and the devotees, the head which bows down to those two forms, and the words that were used were Ubhavalinga, and the limbs which receive the foot water of Vishnu and his devotees are fortunate. So, the eyes and the head, they are fortunate if they see the deity form of Vishnu and the devotees, and they're bowing down to the deity form of Vishnu and the devotees. So this is to reinforce Maharaj Parikshit's statements that the function of the head can be fully utilized when the head is engaged in bowing down before the Lord. So generally one thinks that the greatest usage of the head is using one's intelligence. But Maharaj Parikshit is seeing that the greatest usage of the head is to bow down before the form of the Lord. So, and his representative. So, Srila Prabhupada makes distinctions according to the category of devotee and the usage of the head. So, there's different ways that different devotees can use the head to put the head to its greatest use. So, this is how Srila Prabhupada makes distinctions. He says the first class devotee offers respect to every living entity. So it doesn't matter. Devotee, non-devotee, the first class devotee is able to offer respect to every living entity. Because he considers the body that he's seen to be a temple of the Lord. So that's the first class devotee. So he can bow down to an ant. He can bow down to, I don't know, a dragonfly going past the window. And the second class devotee considers the Vaishnavas to be representatives of the Lord, and so he bows down to the devotees. So that one is quite natural. While the third class devotee, the neophyte, he can bow down his head to the deity in the temple and the spiritual master. So the third class devotee, you can't even see the devotees. So as long as he bows his head down to the deity, that's excellent. And of course the representative, the visible saffron-clad representative of the deities, you can also bow down. So these are the distinctions of how all those categories of persons can use their head in the best way possible, using it to bow down respectfully. So now the same applies to the eyes, being actual eyes, because that was the words that were used, actual eyes. It's like they're not really performing their proper function, so they're not actual eyes unless they're performing their proper function. And so being actual eyes is, the eyes are termed that way when they're used to see the Lord and his representative. In this way, the functions of the body are elevated, so they actually become the proper organ. They're doing their proper function in service to the Lord and his representative. And of course, just as an aside, Srila Vishwanath does mention, of course, there's a method to be employed when you do bow down, because you want to do it properly. So he mentions this as an aside. He says, one should bow down completely touching the ground to the deity forms of the Lord and to his devotee. So there's the proper usage of the head, bowing down, and then there's a proper method to do it. You have to touch the ground with the head. So now, to bring all aspects of the discussion together, one can remember that, and this is from Bhagavad Gita 18:14, there is in fact the place of action where you do something, the body, which is what we've been going into in this because of Maharaj Parikshit's statements. There's the performer, the various senses, which we've been looking at because of Maharaj Parikshit, and the many different kinds of endeavor, the way you're going to try to do it or execute it for some particular action. And ultimately, there's the super soul. So these are all the factors involved in any action you perform. So, like we were discussing, it can be the place of action maybe in front of the deity. There's a person who's performing it, like Srila Prabhupada was making the distinction between the different performers of that action of bowing down. There's the various senses, and we were talking about, how you're actually utilizing the eyes to see the Lord, making them actual eyes, or you're actually using your head to touch the floor properly when you bow down. So that's the kind of endeavor you're making. You're endeavoring to touch the floor. So, and ultimately, there's a super soul. These are the factors, the 5 factors of action described by Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. So one can remember that it's the soul within the body which is acting to bring about the result of activity. The soul is acting. Because remember, everything you're utilizing, it's actually the force of the soul. So it's the soul that's acting to bring about the result of any activity. And Srila Prabhupada states it this way: all one's activities depend on the will of the super soul. So the person acting in Krishna consciousness under the direction of super soul situated within the heart is not bound by any activity. Because there's the other problem. If some action is performed, one is connected to that action, and there's consequences connected to that. But if one's acting under the direction of super soul, then one isn't bound by the activity. So this is that perfection that's being referred to. So Srila Prabhupada summarizes the effects of these statements made by Maharaj Parikshit, and this is what he says. After hearing these statements of Maharaj Parikshit, Sukadeva Goswami, overwhelmed with devotional ecstasy because of King Parikshit's advanced understanding of the Vaishnava philosophy. So that was the effect on Sukadeva Goswami from hearing Maharaj Parikshit's statement. He was just so overwhelmed that here's somebody who's understanding the philosophy so well. It made him completely ecstatic. So Sukadeva Goswami was directly engaged in describing the activities of the Lord, and when asked by Maharaj Parikshit to describe them further, he continued to narrate Srimad Bhagavatam with great pleasure. So of course, when there's a wonderful audience, it makes all the difference to somebody who's speaking. So that was the case with Maharaj Parikshit. He was just the most exceptional audience for Sukadeva Goswami to narrate Srimad Bhagavatam. So now the narration moves to the subject of a Brahmana who had achieved the peacefulness mentioned by Maharaj Maharaj Parikshit. Because remember, right in the beginning, I read that Maharaj Parikshit had said, a true mind is that which always remembers him. So always this emphasis on the actual eyes, actual head, real eyes, real head. A true mind is that which always remembers Lord Krishna. So here is that same description given by Srila Prabhupada. So, because now the narration is moved. Maharaj Parikshit is encouraging Sukadev Goswami to continue the narration. Sukadev Goswami is feeling that great ecstasy of having this wonderful Maharaj Parikshit understanding the philosophy so well. So he continues, and I'm going to read how Srila Prabhupada phrases it. So this is how Sukadev Goswami is narrating. He was a very nice Brahmana friend of Lord Krishna. As a perfect Brahmana, was very elevated in transcendental knowledge, and because of his advanced knowledge, he was not at all attached to material enjoyment. Therefore, he was very peaceful and had achieved supreme control over his senses. So it should be ringing bells in one's head based on what we've just been discussing, because here's almost like a perfect example being given. For somebody who has a true mind, perfect eyes, a perfect head, perfect senses. He's described as very peaceful, and he has achieved supreme control over his senses. So that's a description of this Brahmana friend of Lord Krishna that Srila Prabhupada describing. So Srila Prabhupada does this interesting analysis, and his analysis is like this. The Brahmana was a perfect devotee because unless one is a perfect devotee, one cannot achieve the highest standard of knowledge. So this is Srila Prabhupada doing an analysis of exactly we've just heard about this description of the Brahmana. He has to be a perfect devotee. And he's achieved the highest state of knowledge, is what Srila Prabhupada concludes. And so we're going to try and understand why Srila Prabhupada is making this statement. And the reason given for him being a perfect devotee is that he had surrendered his life to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And one can infer that by virtue of the fact that he was not attached to material enjoyment, and that he had achieved control over his senses. It tells you right away that he had surrendered his life to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that's why Srila Prabhupada said that he attained the highest standard of knowledge, because this is the highest knowledge, to be able to understand one's connection with the Supreme Lord and to be constantly thinking that one is acting in service to the Supreme Lord. So that's the highest knowledge that can exist. And the result of such surrender is this perfect knowledge, which is detachment from the materialistic way of life. So it's such a subtle thing, but it's actually the highest knowledge that there is. Being able to be detached from the materialistic way of life. And this detachment means complete control of the senses. One has to be able to control the senses, which for a devotee becomes automatic just by engaging the senses in the service of the Lord. So, one thinks of senses and you have to rein them in. But the interesting thing is that if you're using them in the right way, they're automatically under control. So in the case of Sudama Brahmana, it was visible. It was externally visible, this detachment from his senses. And particularly the fact that he was detached from eating, so the tongue. Because the first mention that's made about him was that he tolerated hunger. And Srila Vishwanath notes that his wife also exhibited the same qualities. And the words that were used were tata vidhi, and she tolerated hunger, which was shat shama. In fact, she was even more tolerant than her husband, because whatever food she received, she actually served it to him but remained hungry herself. So, but of course, the description here has been particularly about Sudama Brahmana, the friend of Krishna, but notice the attention is also drawn to the elevated position of his wife. This capacity and this visible capacity that there was control of the senses. And Srila Prabhupada explains that to have perfect knowledge means that one knows that one cannot be happier than he's destined to be. So that's perfect knowledge. You can't be happier than you're destined to be. And this is what was the extraordinary thing you could understand, or one could understand by observing Sudama Brahman and his wife. They were completely satisfied with whatever came to them by destiny. They didn't go seeking out ways to satisfy their senses. They just accepted that by destiny, this is how much they're supposed to be getting. So you can infer again that they had perfect knowledge. And that perfect knowledge was, can't be happier than we're destined to be. So that's about as much as I could extract from this whole long series of verses. If there's any question that comes or some comment or expansion of the discussion, please feel free.
Usually appreciate it, like I find it attractive how Bhagavatam is constructed in stories within stories with different layers. In the beginning, this chapter reveals all those layers. So we have the layer of Srila Vyasadeva narrating life, and then Srila Vyasadeva narrates Sukha Goswami, who tells the story as if it's a piece of music, and then the narration goes into Sukadeva Goswami telling Bhagavatam to Maharaj Pariksit. So here we start with the chapter of Sukadeva Goswami. Maharaj Pariksit has been asking, requesting Sukadeva Goswami to speak more. He wants to hear him speak. And then Sukadeva Goswami very appreciates that. And then Sukha Goswami comes into the narration and says, you know, Sukadeva Goswami is like and then it goes back to Sukha Goswami. What I didn't mention was this what the soul or the living entity has to do with it. Is what is one doing its actions. And then you mentioned something also that when the living entity is, the living entity controlling its body, when you control your senses, you are being directed by the living entity.
one I quoted.
Yes. Body, soul, see the doer, various senses, many kinds of effort, and one purpose. These are the five functions. So, yeah, the soul is described as a part of the function as the doer. So, trying to understand put it in a position, because I think it starts with the doer being the part. Yes, there's it's a very important part to deepen understanding. Because in reality, all this is
Yeah. So the question had to do with here's a description of the verse I just quoted of the different factors of action. So the verse was saying the place of action, the body, the performer, the various senses, the many different kinds of endeavor, and ultimately the super soul. So that's Bhagavad Gita 18:14, and you were bringing up that on the for a devotee, there's the super soul being the director of the action, and on the other hand, for persons who, I'll take it, are functioning materialistically, the controller or the orchestrator of action is actually the mode of material nature. So your question was just looking at or wondering how these things play themselves out. So for the person who's understanding the connection with the super soul, for that person, the usage of the senses then is coming from a soul level. It's because it's in relation to the super soul. It's in accord with the direction of the super soul. There's no discrepancy. And for the person who's oblivious to the soul level of functioning, but is functioning on a very materialistic, physical kind of plane, then the statement that the modes of material nature are actually the doers is rather fascinating, because in actual fact, it was brought up, persons are actually those that are functioning in a very materialistic, physical kind of way, are understanding themselves to be the controllers of their actions. And clearly, this is a great fallacy, clearly, because one, the persons don't have an understanding or don't have control of necessarily their makeup is already present, so they're kind of obligated to function in a particular way. So that's the modes of material nature. The second thing is that they don't have control over the consequences of the action. So the consequence of the action will be that there's some effect coming from the action that's being performed. So again, that's the modes of material nature that will actually bring the effect to the person. They have no control over that. So that's the contrast, and the particular personalities that are functioning from the soul level, using their senses as that dynamic force of coming from the soul, are actually not bound to their actions in any way. They're not going to be getting the effect that the material nature would be arranging, and neither are they in the consciousness that they are the ones who are performing the action. They're understanding that actually Lord Krishna is orchestrating everything, and they're aligned with Lord Krishna's desires for them to act in a particular way. So it's quite an interesting, very subtle kind of contrast, but the different understanding means that one's operating in a very, very different way, and one is experiencing life in a very, very different way. One is a very protected kind of existence, and the other one is a very unprotected kind of existence, and a very helpless kind of existence. So those are some thoughts on what you know. Thank you very much. Okay, thank you very much for your very kind attention. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.